Hello, it's Frank, and I have another one of my interviews in which I don't know what I'm doing at all, and I speak to some really cool people who have some things going on in their lives, and I largely don't know what they are, but it's my job to find out what they are, if that makes any sense. Um, this is my project called Stories of Our Lives, and I am trying to just talk to people about, and get them to share themselves, basically, and just so I can show that despite what we believe and all those micro little differences we have, underneath we're all just telling our stories and trying to get on. And if I can do a little bit to just, I don't know, get us to take all our stories a little bit less seriously. we're all a bit brilliant and we're all a bit shit. And maybe if we all kind of accepted that a little bit, we'd be less inclined to kind of, I don't know, rip each other's throats out. So anyway, that's my little preamble. I have a brilliant guy who I only met recently, but I feel like I've known him for years, and I would almost bet that virtually everybody that meets this person feels the same way. He's called Lex Cook, and we met because our sons play in the same rugby team. We had a chat one day. It was almost like a bit of a mandate. My partner Kerry kind of, thought Lex is a good person to speak to. He's really lovely, and we were a bit uncomfortable first of all, and then we got chatting, and he's just a brilliant guy, and we just had such a laugh. So hello, Lex.
Hello, Frank. Hello.
How you doing, buddy? You're right.
I'm right. It was a very nice introduction. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. So partly one of the things in doing this project, which has been so much fun already, I just absolutely love this kind of setup and just talking to people. Part of the thing that this has made me do is think about my connections with people and think about, just have a little think about how I'm, my relationship with any person. And that has gone from family members to people that I spoke to someone earlier on who I don't know at all. And it was fascinating where we went, and, it's just interesting that you meet people and people come into your lives in various different ways. And we met literally standing on a cold, whatever it was, October, watching our sons try to play rugby. Certain amount of enthusiasm. And sometimes you just click with people and it's been fascinating to talk to people that I really believe that everybody's got a story. You know what I mean? Everybody's got something to say. And sometimes that gets covered up in whatever it is, or people make judgments about which story they want to listen to. But really, if you really open yourself to listening to people, everybody's trying to tell their story in some way. And, it's been fascinating. Just in the brief time we've spent together, I already have this kind of like affinity with you. Do you know what I mean? I mean, does that, when I say that to you, does that, can you kind of like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that give you any sense of anything, or does that, when someone says something like that to you, does that resonate? Do you know that about yourself? I mean, do you know? But at this point in your life, do you know that you're that type of person? It's like,
well, no, not necessarily. I mean, do I strive to be that type of person? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I can admit to the fact that I market myself in a certain kind of way. So I'll give you an example. My 9-year-old son is having some challenges because he's 9 years old and he doesn't have a huge amount of life experience, and he's having some challenges with who he is and which bits of him make him desirable in a playground. And I totally understand and sympathise with that, because as I said to you when we met, I've got 2 left feet. I'm no ball player of any sort. So, I understand that when you don't have a clear understanding of who you are because you don't have the life experience to perhaps define yourself or to act on the bits that make you desirable to talk to, then you look for anchors that are really obvious. So for 9-year-old boys, it's playing football. But my son doesn't like football, so he struggles with how to present himself, I guess, and that makes him vulnerable. And so I understand that vulnerability, and throughout my life, I have, without any shadow of a doubt, if I'm honest, marketed myself in a certain kind of way. Now, I don't want that to sound like, I don't have a genuine bone in my body, but it does mean that, yeah, you present yourself in a certain way, and you hope that it resonates with people, and you hope that you can therefore strike a conversation. But the inexplicable bit for me is that, you know, if you do that 1,000 times and you get 10 conversations that you think, you know, that I really enjoyed talking to Frank. And genuinely, I went home that afternoon and said to Ali, I've met a really nice guy. Really, really enjoyed talking to him. We just got on. And I cannot explain to you simply why that is, because, you know, sometimes there'll be someone who, you know, there are people I know locally who have all the core ingredients of someone I would get on with, but actually there's just nothing there, you know.
Yeah, right.
They're nice enough, but there's nothing there in a friendship.
That is really fascinating. That is really fascinating, and I totally get a lot of what you said, because you know, Frankie doesn't play football and has had exactly the same kind of problem, because football is the you know, the donkey that all the kids gather around to play. You know, when they, you know, pinata or something. It is the draw, isn't it? Everything's football, and if you don't play football, you're suddenly slightly outside. And I've seen it in the other way, where Sully played rugby for a bit, and then as over the last year and a half has played football and is a social, you know, kind of stalwart, you know. He's out there and he knows everybody, you know. It's really fascinating. You know what, it's just fascinating you say that, because I think, like, so I want to kind of just go a little bit deeper into that, because I think that's really interesting. Like, I don't know if I'm right here, but partly that what you said, and it's really honest of you, and I think that kind of marketing ourselves, and it must have been a human thing right the way back, but that attempt to, in a way, protect ourselves by trying to fit in and trying to find a way, you know, into groups. And, you know, I've felt the same thing. I felt slightly excluded sometimes, even though I did play football, funnily enough. But you know, and that attempt to create almost, you know, without, I know what you're saying, without sounding like some kind of arch capitalist, but in you know, a kind of personal brand in a way that is going to kind of, you know, facilitate your kind of ease of relationships. That's a fascinating thing, isn't it? That's a complex social mechanism at work there, isn't it?
Yeah,
can you speak to?
Yeah, well,
can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that, in a way, I think that as human beings, we kind of have, like, it's oversimplifying it to say this, but just for the benefit of my explanation, I think you kind of have, there's two yous. You know, you're a bit of humans are a bit of a dichotomy. So you got this you that you present, and then this you that you are. And the you that you are is not necessarily the you that you present. And I think that maturity as an adult comes from the fact that it comes with calendar years. And the reason why it comes with calendar years is because it takes a bloody long time for us to forget that we might be crap at something, or that we might not have enough time to deliver something in our lives. And so actually, you know, it doesn't matter how much I sing in the shower, I now no longer think, and I don't sing in the shower, I'm just using it for the benefit example, but now everyone can hear me. Before I used to sing in the shower, but now no one can hear me apart from the cat. But doesn't matter how many times I sing in the shower, I won't think to myself now, you know, actually, maybe I could.
I might.
If you went back 15 years, you know, if I'm honest, maybe there are a couple of moments, possibly drunk, so maybe late night showers, where I thought, you know, I definitely could. I really could be the next thing. And I think that had I have not had the sort of experiences in life, if I'd stayed where I was, but I had just got older, you see what I mean? If I hadn't, if I'd been locked in that shower for 15 years, I'd still be saying the same thing now.
Right.
Not just movement of time, it's the fact that you get these experiences and you start to realise, do you know what, that part of me is really fake. And that part of me, I feel awkward about. Equally though, I've got bits about me that are fake. And do you know what? I'm quite comfortable with them. In fact, I need them. You know, maybe shouldn't admit this because I don't know you so well that to say to you that, you know, there are times when I rock my head back in laughter, and I know that it is, you know, I know that it's but I actually read about this once. It's a behaviour that is common.
Right.
We all do it. We all make
gesture.
that forced exhalation of air, and you know, and I guess that's what I'm saying. You know, they're the two layers. There's the internal chattering in my head that really is Lex Cook, and then there's Lex Cook who's you know, maybe sort of shifting some, you know, Roadstone, who's one type of Lex Cook, and then there's Lex Cook who's sitting around a boardroom table, who's another type of Lex Cook, and these are layers I've built over the years. And you know, I'm not a total fake, but there are elements of me that maybe you could, that someone who didn't know me so well might say that I was either a chameleon or a fake.
Yeah. No, I get it, and it's, you know what, I study, I create and tutor my own literature classes, and through the 10 or 12 years I've been doing that. Why is it 10 or 12? That's weird. It's either 10 or 12. Maybe it's 11. But you know, within the time I've been doing that, it got to a point where we did so many books where, you know, the central protagonist would have all this stuff going on the inside, and then they'd be battling on the outside with their public self, that I did a course. One of the courses I did last year was called Someone Else Inside, and it was 3 books in which we kind of looked at that kind of, as you said, that dichotomy, that kind of internal you that's kind of untouchable in a way, and then the presentation of that, which is slightly different, you know. And it sounds like, and I think for me, you just absolutely nailed it, because for me, I think if we understand that that's going on with everybody. And you know what I mean? It's almost a bit like, you know, like when you're a kid and you're not one of the coolest, and you see the cool kids, you just think they're cool. You don't think there's anything wrong with them. And it's not until later you look back and you go, shit, they weren't actually cool. They were just, you know, they just had, they had a little bit of confidence or something, but they were just as shit as I was.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Or they were just as brilliant as I was, whatever it might be. And I think that's really fascinating. I think, and interestingly into that, what I love about that is that as you get life experience, and it sounds patronizing to maybe to young people that might be listening, but it's totally not, because we're all 26, aren't we, still in our heads?
Oh, totally,
but you get that life experience, and it just you know, it just nudges you, and you just go, you know what, I was good at football, but I was never going to be a professional footballer, or whatever it might be. And from that, I think what I find is interesting is that when that public persona, or when that public management of your kind of inner self, when those two things start to get close, and you don't have to, you know what, that internal dialogue is not being strained because the brand is so different. You know what I mean? You're hiding so much inside that there's so much stress on your system every day just to maintain the brand or the marketing. With like, when they get close, it's almost like at that point you can really start to flow and shine. And actually, you're always still managing it, like you say. You're always still going to go, oh, that's so funny. But you're kind of like, you're much more aligned, and that's really, that fascinates me. That kind of thing. I think.
It was the point that you said about, you know, not wishing to be patronising anyway. I totally get that, because I when I say sort of, you know, life experience, it makes it sound like it's a qualification that I've passed.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a process by default. And actually, you know, one of the things that life experience brings with it is this ability for you to stop thinking that you've learned something, and to realise that actually you never, if you ever got to that point, and I know it's a kind of Maslow thing as well. So it's not like it would be fake of me to say, you know, and suddenly I woke up one morning and realised I'll never know all the answers. But actually to believe it, to know it in practice, but to believe it with every fibre of your being, to realise that, you know, the thought of not learning something would be miserable, and the thought of knowing how something works in its entirety would be equally as miserable. You've got to have proven yourself wrong enough times that you start to learn the lessons. And as you start to learn the lessons, so you start to think, you know, I'm not going to be so effective with my accent as I used to be. So
Right.
and it makes me laugh, right? Because it sounds a bit
Brilliant.
cruel. Sometimes, when you're in a company of people and they say, and Ali will tell you that I do this all the time. I can't stop taking the mick out of it when people sort of like go, yeah, absolutely, indeed. Or, they talk like a train announcer. They talk like in a way that makes it sound like their conversation is them delivering information from you to how to get from platform 8 to platform 9, whilst adding a bit of customer service and trying to convince you everything's going to be okay. When people do that with their intonation, to me, and I'm not saying this is fact. I'm saying from my interpretation,
Right.
of what how people communicate, I see an element of maturity, sort of like life experience maturity. I see an element of that not quite there yet with that person, and maybe I'm judging them by my own standards, because maybe I have sat there in meetings and said, indeed, when really I just think, I'm not that kind of bloke, so why am I saying it? Because it's not. Now, other people can say it, but that's because that's actually how they talk, but I don't.
Right.
Does that make sense? So you sort of,
it totally does.
it's one of those bits that you strip away from yourself. And now I actually enjoy being kind of a bit more difficult to work out. So if I'm in a meeting with people who, definitely for a multitude of reasons come from a different background to me, and it's demonstrated in the way that they talk and behave. Instead of trying to mimic them like I used to, and I do sometimes still do that, but instead of trying to mimic them to the same extent, as I've got older, I've enjoyed, in certain situations, differentiating myself from them. And I think that's kind of how I would encapsulate what you've described. I would say that's how the two have come together, rather than like that,
I see. Yeah. You know what? While you were talking there, I don't know if you want to speak about this, and because hopefully you're going to allow me to share this recording at some point. But you told me I was just thinking when you said about learning things as you go along, and you haven't got it, but it just gives you a little nudge about the way the world works a bit more. It opens, something up. You told me a brilliant story about when you first started school. Do you remember the story about the friend that you met?
Which one was that?
One of your good friends, but you weren't friends when you first met.
Lawrence George. Yeah.
Would you mind telling that story? Because that just made me laugh so much. And I think it's brilliant because you had an idea of how it was going to be, and it didn't quite work out like that, did it?
It's funny you should mention that, because I Google searched his name the other day, and it was, and I realised it's almost become a bit of an obsession, this guy. I was sitting with my dad. I wonder if I'll ever see him again. And my dad said, just get in contact. And I know you'd think that's easy, but the guy resisted having a mobile phone for the first 10 years that everyone else had a mobile phone.
Right.
He might be in a hobbit hole for all I know. He was a bit, he didn't really embrace that sort of thing. So yeah, the story with Lawrence was that, and some of this may be, how you started your conversation with fact and fiction.
Right.
You embellish over the years, don't you? Because I was 11 years old. But I remember it was the first day, or maybe in the first week, and I was at school, and it was that kind of nervousness where you realise you've really gone up a league. There's clearly people smoking. This was 1984, so there's clearly people smoking, and they're a lot taller than me, and they've got facial hair and all of those things. And so all of those, it's an all-boys school, and it was a small all-boys school, so all of those insecurities were bubbling around.
Yeah.
And the reason why I sort of line that bit of the story up is because I'll tell you in a minute what Lawrence told me he felt afterwards.
Right.
Before I'd gone to school, I remember my dad had said to me, when you get to school, he said, you got to make sure you stand up for yourself. He said, don't be the one to start any trouble, but don't take any crap. Stand up for yourself. If anyone gives you a hard time, and he taught me a couple of things. And around about that time, I'd also just started judo, which meant that I was basically just freezing cold in a really crap gym around the corner, and that was all I'd managed to achieve, just being cold. I was certainly no fighter, and not capable of defending myself in any way at all. But I thought that because I had the white outfit, that effectively made me good.
Of course.
So I was standing in this queue, and all the words ringing around my head from my dad, "Don't take any crap." And this guy pushed in front of me, and I stuck my hand out in front of him, and I said, and even then he was built like a barn door, and I said to him, I just said to him, "Excuse me, where are you going?" And he said, "In front of you." And I went, "I don't think so. There's a queue. You can get behind me." He went, "No, I'm going in front of you." I said, "No, you're not." And he said, "Let's have a fight." And I said to him, "Right, all right then, let's have a fight." So I remember standing, I remember it so clearly, just thinking, he is massive, even at that point. And I said to him, and these were his words back to me, because I was, by this point, the adrenaline was pumping really hard. I can't be sure that this was my memory. I think it was what he told me, but he said he remembered that. I said to him, "I warn you, I do judo." And at that point, he just punched me straight in the face. And I hit the deck. And I had a bloodied nose. And I remember saying to him, "But you can go in front of me." Because obviously I was crying and I was bloodied. But I remember that the thing that came out of that was that, you know, I had kind of made him laugh, and he respected me, and that was the reason why he engaged with me at a later stage. He said to me, "The fact that you stood up to me, you know, a lot of other kids wouldn't have done," and he already knew that about himself. And the reason, going back to the point I was saying a minute ago, I'll tell you what I was thinking about when I was on those first few days, is because he said to me, all he thought about in the first few days at school is, who's going to be the hardest kid in the year. And, you know, the juxtaposition of what I was worried about versus what he was worried about, and then how I reacted versus how I was absolute prime fodder for him. Here's a kid that's worried about, is he going to be able to do his maths homework? Whilst here's a kid worried about, is he going to be the toughest one in school? And someone's just lined himself up for a fight for me. So
that just, you know what, Lex, that's so beautiful, because it just sums up everything about, you know, the way we negotiate our way through our lives, I think. Because, you know, I was talking to someone a couple of days ago, and they had a bit of an issue with a person, and it's like, you know, it's like that, you know, the person I was talking to had constructed the other half of the story, the bit that they are never going to know, you know, like the reasoning for the other person doing stuff there, you know, and it's like, this is what we do, isn't it? It's like, you know, no, I mean, your story's not the same, because those stories didn't, you know, they didn't cross or anything, but those two stories were going on, and they were so different, and they come together at this point. And then actually what came out of it, I think I'm right in saying, it was a friendship at the end.
We were friends all the way through school, and best friends as well. I mean, the point to make about Lawrence was that although he was tough, and he was a tough kid, you know, I remember we got onto the subject because he played rugby, and he went for and it was the under-18s Harlequins team, and, you know, so he was good. But the thing I always liked about the guy, and the reason why we remained such good friends for such a long time, is because he wasn't a thug. He was tasty, but he wasn't a thug. And so, you know, he was a gentleman in so many respects. Yeah, there were some rough edges on him, but there's rough edges on all of us. But generally speaking, he was a gent, and we were really good friends. But also, he had a very sort of, from my perception, so my judgment of him was that he had a very, very simple, and I don't mean necessarily basic, but I just mean he had core values, and he hung to them all the way through the time that I knew him. Those core values never really shifted.
That's interesting.
Didn't want to work like, you know, to an extent, insane extent, because he also enjoyed his sport, and he also enjoyed his sort of survival bushcraft type stuff. Those things, and so we would never ever compromise, and that's the reason why I probably won't find him now, and I don't know where he is now. To those values, and I had mine. And as human beings, I think that although we do have friendships that we hang on to for a very long time, we have equally valuable friendships that we don't hang on to, because we're quite transient in the way that we have to be. You know, I don't live in Tunbridge anymore. I live in Whitstable, but I lived in London for years. So
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. I do love that. I think that, you know, as you say, you move on, but there's something that you retain. There's a trace of that thing still there, isn't there? I think that's really interesting. I think
Yeah,
that's
there is. And I find myself gravitating back actually to Tunbridge for different reasons. I mean, I have a friend that I still see there, but I gravitate back there at different points in my life, dependent on how I'm feeling actually. You know,
yeah,
so if and fortunately for me, my life has moved in the right direction now for several years, and it hasn't gone in quite the peaks and troughs that it was. But I remember
right.
times when I was really, when I was, you know, really out of luck. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? I was really out of luck, so I'd end up at Cambridge. But I was really out of luck, and I'd gravitate towards Tunbridge because
Yeah,
it held so many memories of when my life was at the lower levels of the building. So it
yeah,
was
yeah,
easier
yeah,
to
yeah,
build
yeah.
it back up from there than it was to sort of try and patch up what I'd built, if you see what I mean.
You know what? I get the form of what you're saying, and this is the fascinating thing because I spoke to someone earlier on, and she said almost exactly the same thing. I mean, you know, the content is totally different, but the
Yeah,
form of it is very, very similar. She'd had something happen. She almost used exactly the same words. She had to kind of reconstruct herself, you know, and it was like, for me, I would interpret it as like, you know, you had a story, you know, that some of the stories you had were, you know, were just, you know, they're bad stories. You know, they're based on some reality, but they
yeah,
become the bit we select out, and then that becomes the kind of truth. And then we're
yeah,
in a bit of a shit pit, then, aren't we? And it's like a process of almost like, you know, and I think this is the empowering bit. If we realize that those stories are partly, you know, they're partly true, yeah, whatever that means, but they're also made up because stories are made up, then we can re-edit them. I don't know if you can re-edit, but, you know, we can edit those stories. We
yeah,
can be our own editor, and we can maybe change those stories. And sometimes it's just saying, you know what, the bits you're focusing on, there was all this other stuff going on at the same time, and the bits you're focusing on weren't the only true bits, because there were
yeah.
other true bits as well. And that's really fascinating. I think it's like, in what you said is so interesting in terms of, like, you know, bringing yourself back up again. That's really interesting.
Well, I've also got an example. It's funny what you're saying about how you edit the story or you focus on one particular part, because I think that, you know, as we're growing up, we're kind of told when we embellish a story that we're telling tales. Okay? Like we're doing something that's fundamentally wrong because it's not 100% true. And I
Yes.
do understand that, because there are times when, you know, my own children do it, and I think actually that's not 100% true.
Yeah, come
Um,
on.
and I'm trying to encourage them to be truthful. But
Yeah,
actually, there's a difference between, well, there isn't probably, and I'm not a linguist, but I would have thought in my world there feels like a difference between telling the truth and being honest,
I
right?
love it. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
when I say to Lucas last night, have you cleaned your teeth? And he says, yes. And he does this kind of little like, of course I have. And I said, I know you haven't done it. You know, that to me is like, I said to him, you know, you've got to be honest. You've got to be an honest person. It's not right to lie like that, because, you know, your teeth will fall out. Clean your teeth. And anyway, don't lie to your dad. It's just not on. Okay. So that's honesty.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
embellishing isn't necessarily telling the truth, but actually people need it because they use it as a means of expressing who they are or expressing
Right,
frustration.
right.
But equally, we use it in a way that I think kind of potentially helps explain how we feel, but
Right.
screws us up because it gives us a memory that might not be true.
I think that's so interesting. Wow. Yeah.
I can tell you that I've told my dad over the years. I mean, I've fallen out majorly with my dad over the years, and you know, we're in a good place now, and we're working to be in a better place. But you know, I've had some absolute humdingers with him over the years, and I've said,
Yeah.
you know, well, what about when you did this, and what about when you did that? And he has genuinely said that just didn't happen. What you're saying didn't happen. And I'm like,
That's
but it
amazing.
definitely did. And he's like, it definitely didn't happen. Now, some of those times he's been wrong. And I know that because I'm like, no, I know that's wrong. But other times I think, actually, it is more a feeling than a memory. But my
Yeah.
brain seems to have turned it into a memory in order that I can justify the feeling almost.
It's absolutely fascinating. I've got one for you. And so I did a class, this is 10 years ago, I think. And one of the ladies that came to the group, she brought a friend with her. To be fair, it was kind of to build up the numbers a little bit. So she brings this friend who's never studied in any kind of literature class before. So the class is called Truth in Fiction, kind of similar to what I'm doing now in a way, but we're studying books, and we're kind of talking about the concept of truth and the difficulty of it, and with a capital T, you know. And I'm doing my preamble, and this woman's sitting in the front row looking at me and just shaking her head. And it was hilarious. And I'm like, oh no, this is, you start to feel self-conscious about it. So she suddenly says, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Truth. It's just truth, isn't it? And so I'm like, okay. So can you explain it? I don't get what you're saying. So I said, okay. So we tried a little bit and she wasn't getting it. And I said, look, tell me something that happened to you as a kid. And I lucked out completely, because she said, okay, my brother broke my arm when I was 8. And I said, fantastic. So tell me what happened. So she tells me the story about how her brother broke her arm. So at the end of it, I said, you still in touch with your brother? She says, yeah. And I said, what does your brother think about that? And she pauses for a minute and she goes, well, he doesn't think he broke my arm. And I was like, right, that right there is what I'm talking about. I wasn't there. You were, but who do I believe? Because
exactly.
like, my brother's adamant that he didn't break my arm. And I was like, we could go further into it and define what we mean by broke my arm and what you both mean, but there'd still be this vague area. It doesn't mean something didn't happen. It doesn't mean your arm didn't get broken, but it's very difficult to work out what the actual capital T truth is. So we might as well just stop doing that. You know what I mean? And just say, we both might have been responsible. Neither of us were responsible, whatever it was. But I don't know really where you go with it, but I think it's just interesting to notice it.
I think, I mean, where do you go with it? Well, I think what's important is if more people had an appreciation of the way that they draw on memories to either describe their story or to explain what they mean, then actually there may be more acceptance of, well, there may be not acceptance, there may be less, again, I'm talking from my own experience, I'm not talking from anyone else, there may be less concern of an embellished story playing on your mind. So, sometimes you can tell a story, and I don't think you'll ever stop doing this. Even as a mature adult, you'll tell a story, and there'll be a bit of it that you explain, and it kind of explains how you felt about something at the time, or whether it was. And it's the way that you do it, because you're in a noisy dinner party or something like that. And then afterwards, on the walk home, now some people, I know they don't do this. Some people, their life is, for want of a better description, a tissue of lies, but they're quite happy with that, and it doesn't matter to them. And if you catch them out, it doesn't matter. They'll move to the next town. You know what I mean? They're kind of not that bothered. They just drift along, and actually they never get caught up because they never care. But I'm not that kind of guy. So if I've said something and I feel like I've overrated it, I feel really self-conscious about it for a long time. And actually, it would be better to understand. It would be better if I had, maybe a sort of thought about it a bit more sooner. Then I would be thinking, no, actually, all I'm doing is explaining who I am. And as a result of it, almost sort of full circle, it takes it back to being fortunate enough to sit opposite the screen on my laptop and get someone like yourself introduce me in such a kind way, because maybe listening to me is, for some at least, enjoyable. Probably because I'm bullshitting.
You know what's really interesting though? I love that, because I've seen it when in class as well, and in my classes, it always used to be about the books. First of all, it was very serious and it was about the books. And then through the 10 years or so, it became, you know, it's still about the books, but it became what I became fascinated in, and this is probably why I'm doing this now more, is that what became interesting was people's relationships to the books. And I realized that what people said about the books had less truth about the books than it did about their story. And it's kind of what you were just saying there. You know what I mean? We are always telling our own story.
Yeah,
aren't we? You know, even when we're completely, deep in what we're telling, and we're committed to it and emotional about it, we're still telling our story. We're still telling exactly what you said. We're still telling how we feel and where our passion is and where our belief system kind of fits in. And I think that's really fascinating to understand that, and to kind of just, in a way, I mean, for me, I don't know, it's just like when you can be out like that, there's a kind of empathy that comes, because you realize that everybody's just trying to tell their story. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, totally.
Listen, carry on.
I think that one of the problems that we've got in the world that we're living in now is that not everybody tells their story in the same way. And I think that increasingly it's becoming difficult for some people to tell their story, and maybe easier for others. So if you think about the life without, so two things. The first thing is, I thought, if you ask me today on this video, if you say to me, how are you today? I'm going to have to be honest and say I'm knackered, because one of the kids got me up in the night, and I had an accident and got me up in the night, and I felt really knackered. And it got my mind thinking, because I started to think, actually, you're not allowed to say you're knackered, are you? We're not allowed to say that. Not to say we're really busy, apparently, because we're no busier than we were 1,000 years ago. But actually, everybody has got used to having this device and this device, and so therefore, we now say we're really, really busy. But we are, aren't we? I mean, maybe we're not busy with things that actually make any flipping difference, but we are nevertheless busy because Ali's got her Instagram thing to keep on top of, because that's so critical. I mock Ali, but then I'll look at Facebook on reading crap that not making me a better person and not enriching me in any way whatsoever. But I'm still like, I'll just have a quick look. Why? So we're filling up our lives with all of these things, and it's making us busy, which means that now we have a situation where we don't walk down the road and we don't stop and talk at the wall with our neighbour quite like we used to do. Right. They've got a story, and that's how they communicate. We're not hearing that story anymore. We talk about our kids playing out in the street, and how in today's society they don't play out in the street, and it's all because we're so wrapping them up in cotton wool and all these things. And I think there's an element of truth in that. But I also think that even for them, they have got busy with useless crap like Minecraft. And so now they're not coming out in the street and standing on the street corner and putting unnecessary amounts of WD-40 on the hubs of their bike wheels. You know what I mean? They're not doing that. They're not getting that communication. But then, nutters like Donald Trump, who can write something down in 140 characters, he's getting to tell his story over and over again, and nobody wants to bloody hear it.
Absolutely, it's a strangely warped kind of communicative system, I think, which is really interesting. Listen, I'm gonna kind of tie it up, but I want to ask you a couple of questions that I'm throwing at everybody, and this is just where after I've softened you up a bit. So my question is, Lex, what are we doing here?
Deep. What's this call about, or why? What you mean? What are we on the mortal coil for?
Okay.
Oh my God, what are we doing here? I don't know, but I think as a question, it does. I do find it's a fascinating question. I mean, I love this. I love all this sort of stuff, but I haven't got a clue. Do you know what? I feel like as each day goes by, for all the stuff I was saying about life experience, for each day that goes by, I get less and less of an idea of why we're actually here.
Absolutely brilliant. But that's honest, isn't it? That's just honest.
I haven't got a clue. When I rationalise it, I'll I'll tell you that, all I'm going to be is fertilizer. And yet, when I can't find my keys, I look up to the ceiling and say, "Why are you doing this to me?" And when one of my children says to me, "I'm struggling with this because of dinosaurs," I'm like, "I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you." And then the other one says, something about, I don't know, maybe Christmas or something like that. I'm a massive fan of it, and I love the nativity. You tell me, Frank, what are we doing here? Because I don't know. And when you find out, tell me, and I'll buy a pint.
You know what? You're definitely on, and don't have to worry about that, because we'll hook up and go for a pint anyway. I think we're supposed to be seeing you over Christmas or before Christmas at some point.
Yeah, I think there's Christmas drinks. Ali's organising Christmas drinks, so that'd be lovely.
Fantastic. Lex, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
You've been absolutely brilliant. It's been fantastic to talk to you. I'm buzzing now, so I'm going to go up and probably, I don't know, maybe knock a couple of gins back or something like that.
Well, I really enjoyed it, Frank. So look
fantastic, mate. Thank you very much, Lex.
Beer as well.
Yeah, we will do. Thanks, buddy.
Cheers.
All the best. Cheers. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.